Yeah, I'm just really excited to talk about the importance of, for the financials to the CPO, because as you move into the CPO role, there's new stakeholders, there's new people to interact with, and effectively communicating with that group is paramount. So the way, why this is a topic that I'm so important to me, and I'm so enthusiastic about it is, and in my role at Binder, you'll see, and Shelley will speak of her own experience, but that's where Shelley and I came to know one another, and as we were in that working relationship, we noticed there's not a lot out there on this, and there's as you're trying to put together your board decks, as you're trying to have the conversations, there's not a lot of guidance, and you're constantly trying to reconcile and make the language resonate with that stakeholder group. And as we work together, and Shelley give her perspective on it, at the outset of that, it was really important for me to start to give back to the broader community on this, noticing that there's a gap, noticing that there's a way that I have something that can help other professionals in this function be more effective was really important to me. So that's why I talk about this, the importance of having it in your strategy. So as I said at the beginning, that correlation is just is so imperative. So so many of you have said you've had experience in all three, but wanted to put it in a visual context here. When you're in startup phase, the focus is very much within the function, and the touch point with finance, if you even want to call it that, is really about, is there enough money in the bank for me to hire someone to buy some software? It's a transactional type of view of, I need something to get this done, and is it available? And as Shelley said, I had some experience that in my first foray outside of the corporate space. In the corporate world, there's a lot of mature organizational support functions around you, ranging from HR and in this particular case, finance. There's a CFO. He's got or he or she has functional heads in place, and they're a resource that helps the CPO or the head of product execute their job. And there's a lot of focus here really is more on how you're trending towards your budget, to helping flesh out business cases towards the end of the year budget and the next planning cycle, and also sales support depending on the nature of the company. So that brain trust, that skill set is available to you as an individual, but it's outside of your function, and you can just tap into it when you need it and bring it into there. So as Shelley said, for me personally, I had both sides of the spectrum. In the middle, what I did have is I did have an accounting and consulting background that helped basically give me I guess foundational elements that Shelley saw to look at this role or come into this role. But what's really important here to understand is, in the scale up, you need it all. And you need it all for a whole host of reasons, not least of which, depending on what stage of scale up or growth stage you're coming into, the maturity of the financial department or function may not be there. There may only be a director of finance or a VP of finance that doesn't have the experience from an FP&A or a financial planning analysis perspective to help you on this gap. There's other functions, as we all know, where the CPO is typically helping fill the gap. But within this, that's really critical. The skill set may not be in the organization, and it's not in the organization, or it's not mature in the organization at a time where a lot of critical decisions need to be made, right? This is the point in the company's evolution where product market fit's been achieved, and now it's about, can we turn that product market fit into a successful business? And which decisions you make, which levers you pull, when and where, they all have a very direct impact on what are the potential growth trajectories and success trajectories that the company can get there and can achieve. And it's really important to know that more mature functional organization may not be available, or often is not available there to help the individual. The second piece here is, as you're coming into that function, the business outcomes are typically they're articulated largely in financial terms, and so understanding that. Shelley was, of course, giving that example where the poor product person is, giving their presentation in the board meeting, and people are somewhat tuning out or what have you. Sometimes I've seen it go the other way where, the product person isn't fully engaged or understanding the implications of some of the other sections. So that's so it's really important that this if it's a gap that exists, that you people in these functions work to close it, right? Because it's going to it helps you, and it also helps your organization.
In ScaleUp, the complexity, if you can imagine this, because you've all worked in all three, you've got the same financial, the same single financial that you have in startup, yet you need to move things around. You need to move things from customer success to product to sales. You move them around in these hard lines that you don't move around in a scaled enterprise set of financials, because once the budget's set, it's there. In ScaleUp, you want to move it around because you're maximizing it, and you're private, and your EBITDA is not king. It's more return on that. So there's much more ambiguity, flexibility, and ways to do growth in ScaleUp. And I think that's where people who come from enterprise or PE kind of don't necessarily understand that in ScaleUp, you want to move it around in context of what happens. Not the budget may say something, but the only thing you have to target is the top and bottom line. Everything else in between is up for grabs.
Yeah. Another thing I would add to here is, what you see, in the startup and scale enterprises, you are largely self-contained within your function, and outside of the actual technical aspects of finance, which are important here, I want to kind of hammer home the point, because it's so important, that your team now is a multifunctional, multidisciplinary team, right? It's you're the head of sales, the head of marketing, the head of finance, the CEO. That is your team now, and this is so much about getting everyone to a common language, a common vernacular, a common way of talking about the business. It's it not only improves your impact, but it also helps you leverage that team's insights into your function, right? So they'll have a perspective there that you won't have based on their experience. And I think that's really important here. It's unlocking not just your effectiveness within that group, but also unlocking your access to those different skill sets that have been assembled, around you. And the best way to do that is to be speaking the same language. And I think about it. I've lived abroad a few times, and when you move to another country, you can muscle through with English, but if you're in a French-speaking country and someone's hit your car and you need to speak to the insurance person, if you're trying to basically navigate their call center to find some sort of broken English speaker and hope that gets through, it's hard. So if you learn the language, even some basic aspects of it, it just improves the speed and how quickly you're understood, and moves you into problem solving or execution that much quicker. So to that, we talked about this of it always needs to tie to the financials and the outcomes. You want to really make sure that you're when we talk about that. So first, we won't go into much detail on that here, but it's understanding the basic elements of the financial statements, understanding what is the purpose of a balance sheet, an income statement, a statement of cash flows, these what I would call more operational financial statements. And when you're pulling a lever, when you're making a decision, being able to articulate it, if I do this, this is going to basically affect this number, which is going to then have a cascading impact on this KPI or this key measure. And ScaleUp stage, the two that really resonate mostly with companies, every company can be a little different, but these are fairly common or universal, is looking at that year-over-year growth, right? So not just your revenue number, but how much you're growing from one period to the next, and then ultimately gross margin. And as Shelley had said before, when you're in a more mature company, it boils down to net income. This company's not that mature yet. They're still they're still establishing the level that they need to have their operational expenses in. So it's understanding how much effort is going to actually to develop the product, bring it to market, and get it into customers' hands, and understanding what that margin is on that activity is really the most key. So you as a CPO, being able to articulate that roadmap, being able to articulate those tactical decisions that may need to be made, or strategic decisions. I want to move out of I want to stop focusing on this vertical and focus on this vertical, or moving between segments. These being able to tie those things right back to the financials is going to be key in terms of getting people to getting your stakeholder growth, both your C-suite and the board to be on board, or respectfully challenge, right? It's a team effort. And as I said, unlocking their insights, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier if you're talking to them in something that they understand. So, you're always wanting to make sure that you're speaking at the right level. And at that level, it's typically tied to the bigger picture, bigger business outcomes. So, and teeing up trade-offs. Sorry.
Let me just add something when you're thinking about this. So part of this, I know some questions came in before, which we'll answer at the end in terms of very specific. I can't remember exactly how it was worded, but it was something like, how do I justify a feature, this feature over that feature, or spending money on retention versus something else? How do I justify it? And I think the thing that what we want you to walk away with is, we could tell you the answer to that question, and I will tell you the answer. I'm not going to avoid it, but it's not about the feature or function. It's trying to help you as a CPO kind of understand it at a broader level so that you can apply it to multiple situations, or at least know the questions to ask. If you ask questions in the community, especially around finance, promise you I will answer them, because it's important to me to make sure that the CPO people are up leveling their seat at the table, because I think that CPOs are going to lose the seat at the table if they don't in fact learn this, because I see it a lot. But I think the thing to take home in an EBITDA-based company, which is like, you need to understand what the most important thing is. Most of the time, PE, profit or cash, is what that company is being valued on, and that tends to be the later stage. But in most scale-ups that are a mix of growth, trying to move to profitability, one of the most important numbers, and if you don't know this, look it up, is gross margin, right? Gross margin is the amount of sales minus the amount of money it takes to sell something, or cost of goods, right? That's the most important number with gross margin. And at scale, if that gross margin number is not going up in a higher percent, if that value is not going up to the sales, meaning you should be able to sell more and that gross margin number should be going up and up and up, there's a problem. So that's the first one. And then the second thing you have to realize is, every time you ask something as a CPO, you are below gross margin, which means in essence, you're expendable, because gross margin should be, everything under gross margin is overhead and future spend. Now, that's not really what's happening in product, which is why you guys really need to understand all the things under there. But understand, financial people, 90% of product and development people are below gross margin, which means in times of stress, you get rid of it. I'm not saying they're getting rid of you. Understand that's how they're thinking. So like, when you go, give me this feature, or give me this, they're thinking below the line. So if your gross margin is not getting more efficient, even in scale up, right? All they hear is the peanuts, wah, 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 wah. So, so understand that there's really key lines, even though it's one financial statement, that you need to understand to when you're pitching that. So someone says, how do I do that? So I'm hoping that's coming through. What we're trying to get you to walk away with is that it's not a number. It's not how to do a number. It's how to understand kind of what's important. And it's that span. Thank you, Eric, for that feedback on the span, because we're trying to build that slide out to really help you understand that you need to understand that span in order to ask for whatever it is you want. Because depending on your company, you're going to have to ask, Carlos might ask it one way and Eric might ask it another way, just depending on the situation of some of those other levers in the company. So hopefully you're getting that through. That's what we're trying to help you understand.
The next slide is really, it's a sample here. It's not meant to be an exercise scenario. It's just putting showing an example of how one could put this into that context: churn rate, win rate, estimated impact. when you talk estimated impact, it's always important to understand, are you impacting ARR? Are you impacting COGS, to that above and below the line? If you're impacting ARR and COGS, you're above the line. If you're impacting operational expense, you're below the line, and that's going to be less interesting, or that's going to raise other sets of questions. So how you present that will be digested a certain way, trigger questions you never intended to trigger. So it's really important to always know where you're speaking of here. So and the other concept I would say is not discussed enough is materiality, right? Of what you're looking at. So maybe one example here when we talk about the churn rate. Obviously, in these SaaS software business models, a lot of effort goes into selling it, and then your churn, your net, and your gross churns are really important to monitor. And it's really important to understand as you're thinking of your roadmap, as you're thinking about your personas and segments and verticals and these various cuts, that you're kind of putting that in context of what are the opportunities that I have here to actually affect these financial statements. And if for the period that's being planned, for example, if you have a situation where, let's say, a quarter of your revenue is up for renewal, it's really important to understand that at that next level, how much of that is at risk, right? And your customer success people, they're going to know that. Your customer support, they're going to your account managers, they're going to know who they feel is at risk and for what reasons. What themes are?
I'm going to interrupt you for a minute. If you are in the early stage of a scale up, your customer success people might not look at it, because in the early stage of scale up, they're just going after new logo. So sometimes they ignore that renewals are coming up. So understand it depends on the rest of the maturity. And as a CPO, depending on when you're coming in, do not assume that customer success knows what's up for renewal. It's not always the case.
Great point. And I said it at the beginning, we talked about the maturity of the finance function. Other functions may not be there as well, but that's why this role of CPO is so important, and that full scale is right there. If the customer success or support is not there, or if they really are just driving new logos and no one's really looking to see if the revenue is leaking out of the bucket, then that's going to be a real problem. So if you do your analysis and you say, this is how much I'm going to spend on retention, because and the impact is we're going to take retention from 90 to 94%, and that's going to equate to this number of revenue. That's what they're looking for, right? And then when you get to that number, is it material to the results? Is it moving the needle? If it's not, then you have that answer for your stakeholder group, for your board, to say, we're not going to focus as much on retention at this point in time, and we're going to prioritize this other item because over the period of time in question, we feel it's going to move the numbers more effectively. But so there's not one right answer for any of these things on should you be focusing. It's really understanding the materiality and what area of that statement that you're impacting, and then ultimately what specific features you're doing underneath that. Probably less important to that senior executive state group. They just want to know that you understand it, you know what's happening in there, and you've actually done the level of detail to understand and tie it back to the financials.
So let me give you just a crisp example, because Kevin gave lots of examples, and I just want to give a crisp example. Product people, leaders. I'm talking leaders. This is not product managers. This is someone with a C, chief product officers in a scale up. This is a scale up reality TV example. So people say to me, how much should be on retention? How much should be on this? How much should be on that? And it depends. And so in the first statement, it said financials, you need to tie to the top line financials, because there's only one set of financials, and there's only one, there's not department level, there's one set of financials, and there is outcomes. And so let me give you a high level example that you can understand. If you're going to have 10% of your base churn, and you've looked at it because no one else is, and you bring a thing to the C-suite, and it says, I'm going to spend 20% of this stuff to keep this 10% from churning. In a later stage company, you would spend it. But if your company is going out for funding, they might care more about net new logos and then say, I'm going to let that 10% go, because you're going to take whatever it is. Maybe it's like a third of your development budget to save it. And it's not what they want to do right now. They want to show net new logos, and you reapply that 1/3 to bring new logos in, knowing that you might lose that renewal. The issue isn't that that's good or bad. The issue is that everyone is on the same page. And as a CPO, if you don't level up the conversation and go, it's okay if I don't spend this money on retention, but understand I'm going to lose these customers. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, because in 6 months they will forget, or you didn't tell them that that was going to happen. And then what they do is they go, hey, CPO, you didn't do your job. You lost these customers. So you needed to remind people that that was the choice that you made in the moment, not because it's a CYA. It's because we're all busy and we forget things, right? We got a lot of stuff coming at us. And so part of it is just making sure that you understand the trade-offs and that you're reminding your C-suite peers, because that's your team now, that we collectively made that choice, because we always make choices for the now, right? We feed the now, I want to get funding. And then we go, oh my gosh, at the board, the new investor that we got funding from says, why do you have churn? We might not say, well, that's the choice we made to get your money, to them, but back in our C-suite, we would say that. So I want to make sure that you understand it's not a outcome in ScaleUp. It's not a best practice. It is what is right for your company at that time, at that moment, and can you use the right words? Hopefully that example resonates.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley. I think the point I'd make on top of that is that, you know, the language stays the same, the context changes the decision, right? But that choice was always there. The choices are always, you know, the choices, you define all the choices. Which one you pick is dependent on a whole plethora of variables based on stage, objectives, and outcomes, all those types of things. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. So next slide. You know, really just kind of attending this theme and you know, very whited out visualization here of what this really means in the level of communicating here. So, you know, the product or the R&D budget is whatever it is, you know, and, you know, that's important to understand what it is as a percentage of revenue. And there's a bunch of things you should understand there. And then ultimately it's how it's being deployed. And, you know, the first thing to understand here is really around these key activities. How much is being put against retention? How much is being put against growth and support and so forth? And then for this stakeholder group, then articulating that roadmap in a way that actually visually correlates that. And I think Shelley's bringing me back to that point there. You know, you've got this information. The information doesn't change. What changes is the level of detail that you use based on the stakeholder group, the context, the roll-ups, the pivot of the data. Still one data warehouse, if you will. It's just the pivot of the data that you show ties to the outcomes or the interest of the audience in which you're engaging. So, you know, in this particular case, how are we doing it? Well, we're driving retention, we're driving new logos, support and maintenance is important, and so forth. And here's what we're doing here. Here, I'm making it very easy visually for that stakeholder group to understand how we're applying that, and then as a percentage. Now, there's another level of conversation, obviously, underneath here, but if you're not effectively wetting the palate of that stakeholder group in terms of how things are being spread at the highest level, then that next level discussion is just you're jumping from rabbit hole to rabbit hole and making individual cases as to why you're doing things, as opposed to saying at that bigger picture level, here's how I'm recommending that we allocate these resources at this time. So, you know, this is a way that, you know, this is a way that I think is pretty effective. You know, visual tie-ins through colors back to the language that universally makes sense.
One of the things I want to point out here is this is similar. The reason it's redacted, or reason it looks funny, is because we wanted an actual representation, and so we tried to make sure that there was no, you know, implications of it. And it's older, so it's not anyone current, but it's an older one. But understand, this is a page from an actual board deck. And that XM at the total annual R&D budget XM maps exactly to the number that is, it's like, so let's say this is Q4 2020 and you're at your board meeting. That budget number right there maps to the R&D line that's in the financial statement that they went over at the beginning of the meeting, right? So you're grounding them back to say that line that's below the line that's expendable, right? Because anything below gross margin is expendable. And in their mind, I'm just telling you that's a financial trick because we were accountants. So that X number is, if you go across the financials, it says R&D line. That line is there. Product is in there. Roll it up. This is not about departments. This is getting something across to the board. And I'm going to give you a very specific example because I think stories help. So when you're asking for a feature or saying something, everyone wants to know in relation to what am I giving up or what is the percentage of the total. And I'll give you a very real example in my ScaleUp reality TV. So there was a company I was working with that was extremely excited about, this was early in the stage of like Google translation. And they were, the way they wanted to kind of go about Google translation or kind of internationalizing their product and localizing it really is to use Google translation. And they were so excited about it. The deck, the board meeting of the product person presenting it was all about this cool feature and everything that it was and everything. There was not one number in the deck. It was just that. And the board was like, wow, that's really cool. What happened is that feature escalated so much that it became 25% of the spend of the whole, but it was never shown anywhere. It was just more like if you just put it in boxes without numbers, right? So what this slide is really telling you is some quick way, because remember, board members and investors are on different things. Right? It's like a doctor. They're scanning your stuff right before they come. They don't know what all these words mean. So they're really just going, okay, yes, they're spending about 30%. And once you calm their fears that they're okay with where they think you should be spending it, then they'll listen to what the details of the features are, right? So that's a real example of, they were like, yeah, that's cool. And the board member was like, yeah, you should be doing it. But if someone would have exposed to the board or even to the C-suite that it was 25% of the total spend and they were churning, then somebody would have said, no freaking way. Right? But they couldn't see it in context to the whole.
Point on this, and this is, I think, really key, is a mistake that I've made is when you're coming into the situation and trying to get to this information, product people are problem solvers, right? And we're trying to basically transform things digitally all the time and automate and make things better. And this information is, depending on the state of the company, may not be readily available in a format here. It's imperative that you dig your heels in and produce it. If it's got to be manually for a while, that's fine. If it's going to be directionally correct, as long as you're not materially representing things, that's obviously a no-no. But it's really important that you get to this view somehow, some way. It can be a little bit overwhelming, I think, if you come in and you're asking the types of questions into, and I'm talking really more from a new CPO just coming into their organization, and they're looking for this information. It doesn't exist. If you overextend yourself in terms of trying to figure out how to produce this in a repetitive way, so you do it once and don't have to do it again, that will take more time. And when you're establishing yourself within your role, it's really key that you get to these views quickly. So my advice to anyone who's looking at these things are get to it quickly, figure out how to automate it or streamline it and fix it at a later stage. You need to show that you have command and understanding of your function within this context as quickly as possible.
Financial people, C-suites, they want to know numbers first. They want to know top line first. So you're exactly right, Carlos. You need backup on how much is the benefit and when it will monetize. Not when it will release, but when it will monetize. So this slide we hit first was actually, here's the win rate. Here's how it's going to affect top line. And then this second slide is then the allocation of cost. Understand, it was second, not first. So you're exactly right, Carlos. So this is not the slide that represented. The first one is that, and only when we guaranteed then that we understood about top line impact did we go into cost.
That timing is a real key dimension to these things. If it takes you X amount to build it, you start marketing at this, how quickly is that ramp, and when is the timing of that financial impact? But all those things are important. So as you're accumulating this information, really the main takeaway here is that you've got different audiences, and it's the same information, just basically you're pivoting it, tailoring it to the audience, and that means that you're going to change the level of detail, the focus areas, your words of use, same data roll up. It's the same data that you should be communicating to your team. It'll be a different level of detail, and they'll want to understand it more in terms of those throughputs, and how many people are going to work on it, and the estimates, and use story points, and all the things that are part of the product organization. It still should roll up, right? They're just, that group is the audience I think that product people are obviously most comfortable with. Still there, still important. It just has to make sure that you're that all that work ties up to this, and then when you communicate it out, that level of detail is rolled up, obfuscated, whatever, depending on the person that is being engaged. So, we wanted to give it speaking of that audience, is there's a lot of people around the table, right? And there are specific things or common things that you would expect that the different functional questions should be. So you should be prepared to understand, what typically motivates a CRO head of sales, what typically are the key metrics and the things that your CMO, what is the CEO looking at? There's those things there. And then it's also important to really understand them as individuals. So when you're looking at them, and Shelley used this example, she says, imagine a Post-it note on everyone's head in terms of what is important to them, right? Why? Answer their why. So, what are the gaps across the org? How are we doing on cash? So you're going to spend a lot of money. CFO might be sitting there, the head of finance may be sitting there and going, can we afford this, right? Or what's the impact on gross margin? We're going to be speaking to look for different financial instruments to help us. So understanding everyone's at the table, what their function is interested in and what they're interested in as an individual is really super critical to understanding how to package all this information and this understanding and context and give it to them. And no room is ever the same, right? Which is why you can't just give a one size fits all on this. The objectives, there's some commonality, but there's always a difference. It could be a difference at an individual level. The difference could be driven by the maturity of the person in that function. It can be driven simply by external influences at the time. Whatever it is, you got to understand all of those variables, and then to your best ability, translate these things to meet the need.
How do you balance solidifying the roadmap across 12 to 15 months in advance versus leaving room for add-ons? And I think this is the fundamental difference in ScaleUp. Look, no roadmap is in stone. Nothing is in stone, right? If COVID taught us anything, it's like the speed at which you move. So you have, in ScaleUp, you have to move like a ScaleUp, but at scale. And so this is where you have to learn how to bring information to the table around how to communicate quickly, because it's not about every little feature, Vibor, because you're not bringing that C-suite every little feature because they'll be drowned in the detail. That's where you start communicating, well, I'm going to shift from retention. And so you don't go, I'm shifting these 7 features, because that's your team. You don't need to do that. That's your team. You say, I'm going to switch 10% and 5% between new logo and retention. Because if you bring that detail to every C-suite table, they got a million things going on just like you do, right? And the CFO doesn't come to the table, or the head of finance doesn't come to that C-suite table and tell you every single move they're making to close the books from 10 days to 8 days. They just go, I got to go from 10 days to 8 days. But the product people come and feel like they have to give this amount of detail, and like, you must come to me. And it's no, you have to learn how to get across the information in a way that they can consume it. And it's not every feature. That's why you're there. You roll it up. And it's not about bringing your detailed team members to every meeting. Does that mean you don't have a product meeting where your stars are presenting to the CEO? Absolutely not. It's not this meeting. It's really a meeting to give your next level down a chance for, to learn how to present. You should be spending 20% of your time rolling up information so that your C-suite can digest it, so you can be a valuable member of that C-suite team, versus being this like thing that no one understands the words you're saying, because that is the biggest feedback I get from every CEO. Shelly, I don't understand what they're saying. Like, what words did you start using at the C-suite? You may use a completely different set of detailed words to your team and to the engineering team or to your customers, but what's the words that resonate with your C-suite so that you can communicate quickly on trade-offs they're making versus what you're making? Quickly is the name of the game, right? And that they understand the traversing financial effects, because that is the universal language of business, is the financial impact. So what you have to learn, and that's why we talk, like, learn the language of finance. We want you to be experts in product, but we want you to leave 90% of those words and experts with your team behind you, because you have a new team. Your team is this peers around you.
That is really critical. The C-suite is your team. It's no longer the product organization. You're representing the product function at the executive level. Why is the CRO asking for the roadmap, right? The CRO is typically asking for the roadmap for a couple things. One, they want to make sure that their people driving new logos have a story to tell the market. We're a SaaS company, we're innovating, and look at all these wonderful things that we're going to do. Two, there could be a large opportunity out there that might be contingent on feature A, B, and C. And then, the third question they have, is, and then that starts to deteriorate if they're selling off of the roadmap, right? Then you're starting to build up contract debt, which creates a whole other problem. So how you engage the CRO in that conversation would be very different how you address the CFO in the organization, which might be more concerned about the timing of your hiring ramps and these other types of things. So even on that set in stone aspect of it, knowing who you're speaking to around the table, or what the question each of those people have on that is very different. It's not a one size fits all.
There is no one single version of that roadmap that you use, especially in ScaleUp. So there is no one template. There's not a roadmap. There's different views. For anyone who's come from an engineering background, right, there is like the four views. I can't remember the name of it now. It's been a while, but there was a logical view and the implementation view and the physical view, right? There's different views, and the mistake that product people make is try to do one size fits all. So you've got to be careful what you're sharing, and especially in ScaleUp. And there is no, and again, I want to stress, the ScaleUp product leadership role is different to any other stage of a company, that you have to be aware of, like, what you share and what you don't. And this is where people don't necessarily make that leap into the sea. And the one rule of thumb I can tell you is this: the question that, and you would answer the question differently, not only depending on the person's role, because remember, around the C-suite, each one of these people are there. If you've come from enterprise, you're taking a lower salary because you're getting equity. So these guys are also shareholders, right? Significant shareholders. It's the point there. So you're in it together so that you can get the equity. But it's in the earlier stage of a scale-up, or the question I always ask every CPO in a scale-up is, what percentage of revenue, like when you're looking at 21 planning, what percentage of revenue is dependent on you rolling off something off the bus? Meaning, like, if they have a growth rate of 30% and what is available today to sell, it will only get 30%. There is no one else looking at that except the product person. So your roadmap is going to need to have more flex in it if you have a bigger percentage of gap to close. So as you get more mature and as you have more recurring revenue and as you have more products, it becomes less relevant, and you can have more, which is also why later in the stage of an enterprise, product doesn't have end-to-end exposure, because they have no impact on current year. Zero. There's not a single person, when I worked for Hewlett Packard, there is not a single person who would have predicated their share, their commitment for their P&L based on something I might release that year.
That's why it's called research and development.
Right. That's why it's right. Nothing is in year. It's future, but nothing is in year, because no one is going to miss their deliverable for that shareholder, meeting. So in the earlier stage of scale up, the more that they're waiting for your product to meet in year growth, the more flexibility and the more open you need to have on it. So what does that mean? As a leader, as a product leader, you have to go into the C-suite and be confident that you can be agile. And to your team, you got to, like, they want to do these long form things because that's what they do. And you got to say, okay, knowing that you might have to change it. But you're not going to change it just to change it. So you want to give autonomy to your team, but you can't, but you need to keep moving. This is the C-suite in a scale up, isn't it?
From a mindset perspective, I would recommend, Shelly and I were talking about this earlier today, think of that roadmap as another financial statement, right? Just think of it as a supplemental financial statement, and it should make sure that it ties into that view. So I'll let Shelly have the last one.
I made comments around the board through the whole thing, so I'm not going to do that. Just know that the words, you're saying more detail around the C-suite table, and at the board, it's even higher up. And the biggest thing I can tell you at the board, if there's one way to do it, is, with your family, it's like you can say something bad about your sister, your mother, your brother. You can say it, but if someone from the outside says something bad about them, you're going to defend them to the hilt, even though you might agree with them. You're going to defend them because it's your family. It's the same thing when you go into a boardroom, you are tied at the hip, and you're not trying at all to throw anyone, to not be truthful, but the board table is not the time to disagree with your family. Right. So you may have all kinds of discussions at the board table or at the C-suite table, but when you go into the boardroom, you are tied at the hip. And if one investor asks you as a product person, do you think they can sell it? You better have those answers as a family when you go in there, because that dissension makes a lot of different things. So again, words matter, different levels, different things. That's what we wanted you to walk away with. It's just enough understanding to know there's a lot that you probably need to understand. Even Kevin and I, who have financial backgrounds, both with accounting degrees and have worked in product, we challenge each other on things. So big topic, and hopefully it just whets your appetite to know that if you want to be successful as a ScaleUp CPO, this is something that you really need to spend some time on. And there's absolutely no material in the market today. I can